Good morning and Merry, Merry Christmas. I'm glad that you've joined us here at Mesa Presbyterian Church. We decided this year, since we couldn't have our typical Christmas brunch, and oftentimes that was a time for sharing and some storytelling, that we would just create a bit of a kind of a passage of Christmas stories and Christmas readings. So a number of members of the congregation will be reading from all different kinds of Christmas traditions, from the serious to the silly. So I hope you'll enjoy this being a part of your Christmas Day celebration.
This is the original Christmas story from the Gospel of Luke. In those days, Caesar Augustus published a decree ordering a census of the whole Roman world. The first census took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. All the people were instructed to go back to the towns of their birth to register. And so Joseph went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to the town of David in Bethlehem in Judea, because Joseph was one of the house and lineage of David. He went to register with Mary, his espoused wife, who was pregnant. While they were there, the time came for her delivery. She gave birth to her firstborn, a son, and put him in simple cloth wrapped around like a receiving blanket, and laid him in a feeding trough for cattle, because there was no room for them in the inn. There were shepherds in the living area in the field, and kept night watch by turns over their flock. And the angel of the God appeared to them, and the glory of God shone around them. They were very much afraid. The angel said to them, "You have nothing to fear. I come to proclaim good news, news of a great joy to be shared by the whole people. Today, in David's city, a Savior, the Messiah, has been born to you. Let this be a sign to you. You will find an infant wrapped in a simple cloth laying in the manger." Suddenly, there was a multitude of heavenly hosts with the angel praising God and saying, "Glory to God high in heaven, and on earth peace to those whom God's favor rests." When the angels had returned to heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let's go straight to Bethlehem and see this event that God made known to us." They hurried and found Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in the manger. Once they saw this, they reported what they had been told concerning the child. All who had heard about it were astonished at the report given by the shepherds. Mary treasured all these things and reflected on them in her heart. The shepherds went away glorifying and praising God for all they had heard and seen, just as they had been told.
The Mysterious Moving Nativity by Cheryl Kirking. My 5-year-old triplets watched intently as I carefully unwrapped the porcelain figures of the nativity set. "Can we help, Mama?" Sarah Jean asked hopefully. "I think I'll do it this year, honey," I answered. "But you can set up your crush today," I suggested, reminding them of the molded plastic nativity set they had been given. They inched in closer. "I like this one better," Bryce remarked. "Me too," Blake agreed. "They look more real." I arranged the figures on a piece of green velvet as I do every year. In the center lay baby Jesus in the manger with Mary and Joseph on each side. Keeping a respectful distance is the shepherd, his lamb resting dutifully at his feet. The wise men approached from one side as if arriving from their long journey. The next morning, I noticed that all the figures were clustered in a tight circle around the manger, so I put them all back in their proper places. By afternoon, they were all packed in a little circle again. Once again, I returned them to their original places, only to find them a couple of hours later, tightly gathered around the manger. Even the lamb's head was resting right on baby Jesus' foot. I glanced around the room at the children's nativity. There too, the wise men, shepherds, cattle, and all crowded the Christ child in a tight circle. Obviously, one or more of my little rascals was rearranging my nativity set. I felt a tiny flash of irritation before experiencing a far greater flash of inspiration. Isn't this what Christmas is all about? Drawing as close as we possibly can to Christ. I smiled and began to quietly sing, "Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him, Christ the Lord. Let the children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these."
This is Merry Christmas, amigos, Pan-American style. 'Tis the night before Christmas, and all through the casa, not a creature is staring. Caramba, ¿qué pasa? The stockings are hanging con mucho cuidado in hopes that St. Nicholas will feel obligado to leave a few cosas aquí and allá for chicos y chicas and something for me. Los niños are snuggled or safe in their cama. Some are vestidos and some in pajamas. Their little cabezas are full of good things. They're all esperando lo que Santa will bring. But Santa está at the corner saloon, borracho since mid-afternoon. Mama's sitting beside la ventana, shining her only pin para mañana. When Santa returns to his home, zigzagueando, lit up like the Star-Spangled Banner, cantando. And Mama will send him to bed con a right. Merry Christmas a todos, and a todos, good night.
This morning I'd like to do an adaptation of a wonderful story written by Harriet Ritchie in 1995 called He'd Come Here. After the Christmas service, my kids announced that they were hungry for breakfast. "There must be some place open," they muttered. So we piled in the car, and our son quickly placed an order for 3 hamburgers. After riding around for a while, we were headed down the interstate and finally found a truck stop, which was almost deserted. But by now, the kids were sleepy, and my wife then opened the door and headed to the door. The jukebox was playing something like this: "When you leave, walk out backwards so I think you're coming in." The only suggestions of Christmas were the multicolored blinking lights around the large window. The air in the restaurant smelled of coffee, bacon, and stale cigarette smoke. At the counter, a one-armed man in a baseball cap was drinking a Pepsi from a bottle with a straw. 2 other men sat around a table, eating and drinking. At such hour, I couldn't help wondering where they had come from or where they were going. We chose a booth beside the window because the kids wanted to see the lights would make our faces change colors. Then a thin woman named Rita came to take our order. She looked like any waitress that who would have been unlucky enough to draw the late shift on Christmas Eve. Old for her years, I guess she wore her hair tucked behind her ears the way that my wife does when she doesn't want to do anything else. Rita managed a weary-looking smile as she handed us the menus. Our son was holding the salt shaker upside down by then, spilling salt on his hand and licking it. I gave him a stare and looked up in time to see Rita wink at him. "No hamburgers," we told the children. "This is breakfast." They moaned and ordered pancakes with sausage. They definitely ate the sausage between the pancakes, hamburger style. This wasn't my first breakfast at 1 a.m., but the others had been on someone else's china. The snob of me was kind of feeling out of place. Years from now, I thought, oh, we'll all laugh and say, remember the Christmas we ate breakfast at the truck stop? That awful music and those tacky lights? I was staring out the window thinking such thoughts when this old Volkswagen van with Texas license plates and an overload of luggage drove up. A bearded young man in jeans got out. He walked around and opened the door for a young woman who was holding a baby. They hurried inside and took a booth near the back. "Where are you headed?" somebody asked. I couldn't hear the answer, but I imagined grandparents somewhere anxiously waiting to see their grandchild for the very first time. As Rita took their order, the baby started to cry. The father lifted the baby up to his shoulder, but it didn't help. Rita poured them some coffee. The mother took the baby and began rocking her in her arms. "Why doesn't the baby stop crying?" our daughter asked. "Well, she probably just wants something to eat," I told her, remembering all the times I tried to drink a quick cup of coffee and support my wife while she was feeding. As if on cue, the baby would demand immediate attention. The mother picked up a diaper bag and she started to leave. She held the baby's head against her neck as if she could muffle the noise. Rita came over, reached out, took the baby. She said, "Drink your coffee, hon. Let me see what I can do." There was something about the way Rita took that infant that made me think she'd raised half a dozen of her own. She began talking, walking, playing with the baby. Rita showed her to the man in the baseball cap, and he began whistling and making silly faces, and the baby stopped crying. Rita showed her the blinking lights and the lights on the jukebox, and she came over to us and said, "Just look at this little darling. Mine are now all so big and grown." The one-armed man took the pot of coffee from a burner and started waiting all the tables. As he finished filling our mugs, I started to tear up a little bit. My wife asked me what was wrong. "Nothing, just Christmas," I told her. "Go see if you can find a Christmas song on the jukebox," I told the children. And when they were gone, I said, "He'd come here, wouldn't he?" My wife said, "Who?" I said, "Jesus. If Jesus were born in this town tonight, and the choices were our neighborhood, the church, or this truck stop, it would be here, wouldn't it?" She didn't answer right away. She looked around the place, she looked at the people, and finally she said, "Well, either here or a homeless shelter." And I said, "That's what bothers me. When we first came here, I was kind of feeling sorry for these people, because they probably weren't going home to neighborhoods where the houses have candles in the windows and wreaths in the door. And listening to this awful music, I thought, I'll bet nobody has ever even heard of Handel's Messiah. And now I know that more than any place I know, this is where Christmas is. And in some ways, I don't belong. As we walked to the car, my wife put her arm around me. She says, "Remember what the angel said? I bring good news of great joy to all the people." I said thanks, but I wasn't really assured. The houses in our neighborhood were dark by the time we got home, and as we passed the Milfords, I wondered what Christmas Day would be like for them. Their daughter had died in a car accident during the summer. And next door, Jack McCarthy had lost his job. A little down the street lived the Baileys, whose marriage was hanging on by the slimmest thread. And Mrs. Smith's grown son had died from a terrible illness. Maybe we're not so different from the people in the truck stop, I thought. After we took the children in, I picked up the Bible and I read the passage, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." And then I found the Christmas story in Luke, just to be sure it really did say, "I bring good news to all people." Many Christmases have passed since that night, and I still believe that Jesus would be born in what I'd call an unholy place. But rich, poor or in between, we are all poor in spirit. We all have more unhappy memories than anyone would guess, and burdens that we never share, and the endless, sometimes meaningless daily grinds, and the comings and goings of our lives. Our souls so often are far from home, whether we know it or not. In the places where we're broken, in the dark hole where something is missing, in the silence of unanswered questions, this wondrous gift is given.
This is part of a reader's theater from writing by Madeline L'Engle called A Sky Full of Children. I walk out onto the deck of my cottage, looking up at the great river of the Milky Way flowing across the sky. A sliver of moon hangs in the southwest with the evening star gently in the curve. Evening of this day, evening of the century, evening of my own life. I look at the stars and wonder, how old is the universe? All kinds of estimates have been made, but as far as we can tell, no one is accurate. All we know is that once upon a time, or perhaps once before time, God called everything into being, a great breath of creativity, waters, land, green growing things, birds and beasts, and finally human creatures. The beginning, the Genesis, not in ordinary earth days. The Bible makes it quite clear that God's time is different from our own. 1,000 years for us is no more than the blink of an eye to God. But in God's good time, the universe came into being, opening up from a tiny flower of nothingness to great clouds of hydrogen gas to swirling galaxies. In God's good time came solar systems and planets, and ultimately this planet on which I stand on this autumn evening as the earth makes its graceful dance around the sun. It takes one earth day, one earth night to make a full turn, part of the intricate pattern of the universe, and God called it good, very good. A sky full of God's children. Each galaxy, each star, each living creature, every particle and subatomic particle of creation, we are all children of the Maker. From a subatomic particle with a lifespan of a few seconds to a galaxy with a lifespan of billions of years, to us human creatures somewhere in the middle in size and age. We are made in God's image, male and female as we are, as Christ promised us, God's children by adoption and grace.
Children of God, made in God's image? How? Genesis gives no explanation, but we do know instinctively that it is not a physical image. God's explanation is to send Jesus, the incarnate one. God in flesh, actually. Don't try to explain the incarnation to me. It is further from being explainable than the furthest star in the furthest galaxy. It is love, God's limitless love, infleshing that love into the form of a human being. Jesus, the Christ, fully human and fully divine. Christ, the second person of the Trinity. Christ, the maker of the universe, or perhaps many universes, willingly and lovingly leaving all that power and coming to this poor, sin-filled planet to live with us for a few years to show us what we ought to be and can be. Christ came to us as Jesus of Nazareth, wholly human and wholly divine, to show us what it means to be made in God's image. Jesus, as Paul reminds us, was the firstborn of many brethren. I stand on the deck of my cottage, looking at a sky full of God's children, knowing that I am one of many brethren, and sistren too, and that Jesus loves me. This I know. for the Bible tells me so. Bathed in this love, I go into the cottage and to bed.
All right, so part of the Christmas story is the journey of the Magi, and listen to this part of the text from Matthew. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising, and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people, Israel." When they saw the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road.
So I am so delighted this morning to have parts of the Napoli family join me for the telling of Coyote Epiphany, which is a story I wrote a long, long time ago, but it's really fun and appropriate for this season. So, and it's the story of the king sort of set in a New Mexico context with kind of a mischievous coyote as the star, okay? New Mexico, right here in New Mexico. All right, so let's start the story. In most nativity scenes, unless you look very carefully, you will miss one of the most interesting animals who ever came to visit the Christ child. Do you see him hiding over there in the corner of the stable? It's Coyote, that old trickster. And this is the story of how he came to be there on the night of Epiphany, the night that the kings came to visit the baby Jesus. So I have a picture. There's Coyote in the... He's hiding in the bag. He's a bad boy. Okay, so Coyote lived in the desert. And one day he was doing what his kind do best. He was zigzagging back and forth across the sand dunes and arroyos, and his nose picked up one scent and then another. Then Coyote skidded to a stop, and his nose quivered as it gathered in a scent that he had never smelled before, and he shook his head, dizzy from this delicious aroma. Coyote whispered to himself, "I must find that scent. It makes me giddy like a pup. If I could possess that aroma, I'd be the happiest creature in the entire wilderness." So Coyote loped off in a straight line to discover its source. And he came about a caravan of camels and royalty and servants. Now the Coyote could easily pick out that camel which was carrying the scent that he so liked. And he followed it at a distance. And when they set up camp that night, he watched the bundles and the boxes being unloaded, and he knew exactly which container held the fragrance. One of the dignitaries in the party, an old man with a white beard and a kind face, opened this jeweled case and slowly breathed in the fragrance. And his face shone with pleasure. What delightful treasure is frankincense! A gift truly fit for a king. Coyote nodded in agreement, since he thought himself as the king of the wilderness. So as the evening lengthened, the old man set the box down next to him, and he nodded off to sleep. Then Coyote schemed aloud. "I'll just sneak through the camel herd and snatch that case from that old man. I will be so happy. I'll do the coyote jump and leap 3 feet into the air." He leapt up in delicious anticipation. Let's do the coyote jump. scheming. Here's Coyote scheming. Now Coyote begins to weave his way through the camel's legs, but he's so intent on the object of his desire that he did not see the big lead camel rear back his leg until it was too late. Coyote went sailing out of the herd at about 3 feet off the ground and landed in a heap. It was not the kind of coyote jump he had in mind. He moaned, oh, as he picked himself up, and he looked as a second dignitary, a dark, muscular man, came over to the fire and stirred it with a stick. And then he cracked open the box, and he too took a big sniff, and he just smiled contentedly. Now Coyote muttered under his breath, oh, I do hope you enjoy that last noseful, because that will soon be mine. And then I'll be the happiest creature in the entire wilderness. He says, I'll leap 3. And he caught himself in mid-sentence, and he rubbed his aching ribs, and he says, oh, I think I'll do the Coyote Jig. And the coyote kicked up his heels in a feverish folk dance. Let's do the Coyote Jig. Oh, we're so excited. We're going to get the Frankenstein. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay. All right, we've been jigging here. Then the big man set the box down. And he went to the tent. And Coyote decided to make his move. Low and fast, he dashed towards the container, which was perched on a rock by the fire. In his haste, he did not see until it was too late the hot charcoal that had been stirred out of the fire. And as he lunged the last few feet, his right paw landed squarely on the ember. Guess what he did? He danced about the most imaginable jig that's possible. He yelped and he whimpered away from the fire without the treasure. So let's do the real Coyote Jig. Ouch, that hurt. So in the meantime, the third man, the youngest, who had long gold flowing hair, came to the fireside. Coyote watched with narrowed eyes as he also unclasped the case and drew in a long sniff of its fresh aroma. Coyote grumbled, oh, they are really torturing me now. I simply must have that box. With it, I'll be the happiest creature in the desert. I'll dance and he remembered the pain in his blistered paw. He says, I'll sing at the top of my lungs the coyote howl. Very good. Now Coyote watched as the young man took the box into the tent. He made his way to the entrance and he listened for the light snoring of the young king. Then he crept into the tent ever so quietly, but it was dark. And even though the coyote's nose was keen, he was soon able to get the box in his mouth. However, in his excitement and haste, he whirled around and he slammed into a huge stack of chests. He upended them, and the one on the very top that was heavy with gold coins came crushing down and landed right on the coyote's tail. Can you guess what the coyote did? He howled at the top of his lungs, ow! So he, of course, dropped the box and fled out of the tent. Let's do the coyote, ow! Ow! Now the next morning, while the men packed up the caravan, Coyote sat behind a scrubby tree with sore ribs and a blistered paw and a tail that now had a painful crook in it. He was in a foul mood. Nevertheless, he was determined to have that Frankenstein, and he limped and he whimpered after the caravan the whole day. Toward evening, they entered a city, a place where the coyote rarely ever went. They made their way to a livestock stable, and there they greeted a young couple with a newborn child. Coyote slipped back in the oxen stall, to wait for another chance to get the treasure. The kings made homage to the child. They bowed and they placed wonderful gifts around the manger where the baby was lying. The first was a box of gold coins. Coyote thought to himself, good riddance, those things hurt. Then the second king offered a bundle of myrrh, a rich spice. The youngest king, much to Coyote's dismay, placed the precious box of frankincense beside the sleeping infant. Well, then Coyote waited for them to all go to sleep, all the while talking to himself in his head about what he's going to do next. Now that baby will not miss that frankincense. All those other gifts, they'll be useful, but not that scent box. The poor thing probably doesn't even like the smell of it. After they bedded down for the night, Coyote left his hiding place and tiptoed, still with a slight limp, to the manger. With his long snout, he reached up into the crib and ever so gently picked up the box without waking the child. And he was about to turn and make his escape when he felt a hand on his head. He stiffened, cutting his big yellow eyes upwards to see who might have caught him. And it was the mother of the child, who had introduced herself to the kings as Mary. And she said, "Greetings, brother Coyote. Did you also come to greet my son? What a lovely gift you have brought for the newborn Messiah." Because he had the box of frankincense in his mouth. Was Coyote ever in a spot now? And usually he was pretty quick-witted enough to wriggle himself out of trouble, but honestly, he didn't know if he should run or if he should stay. And then the young father joined his wife, and he smiled gratefully at Coyote. Well, do you know what that old trickster did next? Coyote slowly and carefully set the box back down in the manger. Mary continued to stroke his soft fur, and he found himself rather enjoying her touch. Just then, the child stirred, woke up. He stretched out his arm, and his tiny hand came to rest on old Coyote's nose. Coyote sniffed. It was a delightful scent, even cutting through the fragrance of the frankincense. It was a baby smell, and what a remarkable baby it was. You know what? Coyote left the stable that night without the frankincense. And as he loped back into the wilderness, the stars were bursting overhead. And oddly enough, even without the object he so desired, he felt like he was the happiest creature in all the wilderness. As so often happens, the Great One knew much better than Coyote what brings true happiness. You see, no matter what brings someone to the manger at Christmas, be it devotion, or curiosity, or habit, or even mischief, the Christ child has a blessing for them all. Heading home, old Coyote was so happy to have been part of that night that he did the coyote jump, he danced the coyote jig, and he yelped the coyote howl. Okay, the coyote jump. The coyote howl. Oh! The coyote jig. And he was the happiest creature in the whole wilderness. And that's the story of Coyote Epiphany. Every Christmas since, Coyote still gets all the wilderness creatures together to join him in jumping, jigging, and howling for the birth of the Christ child. And he says to all in earshot, have a Merry Christmas and a Coyote Epiphany. Thank you all. Thanks for helping today.
The Giveaway, written and illustrated by Ray Buckley.
There was a grove of trees where the forest grew thick. The trees had stood there for as long as anyone could remember, their roots intertwined, so that nothing could affect one without affecting them all. They were known to the inhabitants of the forest, the four-leggeds and those who fly, as the Old Ones.
In the middle of the Old Ones stood the oldest of them all, taller and broader than the others. If one stood beneath it, one could not see where its crown touched farther sky, and smaller trees grew around its roots in the safety of its vastness. It was called the Ancient One, for it had known the Creator longest of all.
It was to this grove that the creatures of the forest and the plains, the four-leggeds and those who fly, gathered for council. Each had sent one speaker, the oldest and the wisest of its kind.
Snow fell thick on familiar paths, and each arrived in silence, waiting with the patience of those who have seen much. When the circle was complete, they stood listening to their hearts.
They have lost their way. There is no pattern to their journey.
Snow Goose nodded in agreement with Whooping Crane.
They have lost their purpose. They do not gather seeds. They do not know who they are.
Tatanka, the bull buffalo, dropped his head low.
They take more than they need and give nothing back. They do not give away.
They do not see long distance. They keep more than they can eat, while some are hungry. They no longer know that they are connected.
They no longer know that they are beautiful,
said Fox sadly, her white coat blending with the snow.
They decorate themselves with stones and hide their spirits.
They think that power is what they can hold on to. They say, "This is mine," and build lodges too large so that they themselves will appear big. They must make others small so that they will look big. In the end, they must destroy themselves or others. They have lost their names and do not know who they are.
Grandmother Turtle, who was the last to arrive, made her way slowly to the center of the council. She lifted her head so she could see all who gathered beneath the old ones. Her voice was barely audible.
We must give away ourselves to them. We must speak to them in soft voices. We must remind them of who they are.
She paused, lowering her head into her shell. Then suddenly she lifted her head as high as her neck would allow.
I will give them my shell. I will come with no protection, and they can use my shell to adorn themselves.
Around the circle the council was silent. The wind did not blow through the trees. Not a single branch on the old ones fluttered. The forest was still as Grandmother Turtle began her walk back to the empty spot in the circle.
I will teach them the pattern of life. Snow Goose and I will remind them of the seasons. I will teach them to gather seeds so that no one need be hungry. I will give them what I have stored.
Eagle searched the night sky and, without lowering her head, said,
I will give them my feathers. Perhaps if I cannot fly, they will not feel small. Tatanka, the bull buffalo, stood with his legs squarely on the earth.
I will give them my flesh to sustain them, and my skin to warm them. I will give myself away. Each council member in turn rose to speak of the gift, that most costly portion of themselves, that each would give away.
When the circle was complete, a new voice was heard. In the shadow of the Ancient One stood the Creator.
Woe, children! You will give yourselves away, but they will not know that. They will say, See what I have taken, and think that they have made themselves larger. For a moment, the Creator paused. It is I who must give myself away. I must give away my protection and come vulnerable to their lodges. I must choose to become small, so that they can choose to know me large. I must give away my name, so that they can know their names.
The Ancient One had stood silent. The sound of her voice had not been heard in many winters.
Great Creator, how can this be? How can the great mystery become small?
The Creator stood beneath the Ancient One. The shadow of the great tree became light, and the grove of the old ones became full of the presence of the Creator. A baby will be born. He will be the son of the great mystery. He will be born not where the two-leggeds are gathered, but among the four-leggeds and those who fly. He will bring light into confusion. He will bring hope into despair. He will bring love, and his name will be great.
The Ancient One began to tremble, and those who fly left its old branches. The grove of the old ones moved in its quake.
Creator, what can I, whose name speaks only of my age, give away to the great mystery become baby? What can I do from my great grove in the forest?
The Creator turned toward the Ancient One. The voice of the Creator was low. You will be his support. You will be his place of rest. You will hold his body. You will hold him up in the beginning and the end.
And the Ancient One wept, partly for joy and partly for sorrow.
I hope you've enjoyed the stories of Christmas on this Christmas Day. I'm sure there's stories you could have shared as well. And if you're with people you love, I hope you'll tell Christmas stories to each other. Moments you remember from your childhood and your adulthood, the joys and really the unfolding of life in the Christmas season and all the unexpected ways it happens. We'll close our time with a Christmas prayer that comes from Robert Louis Stevenson. Please join me in prayer. Loving Father, help us remember the birth of Jesus, that we may share in the song of the angels, the gladness of the shepherds, and the worship of the wise men. Close the door of hate and open the door of love all over the world. Let kindness come with every gift and good desires with every greeting, and deliver us from evil by the blessing which Christ brings, and teach us to be merry with clear hearts. And may the Christmas morning make us happy to be your children, and the Christmas evening bring us to our beds with grateful thoughts, forgiving and forgiven for Jesus' sake. Amen. And to all of you, a Merry Christmas.